Okay, welcome back. This is the virtual residency workshop, Thursday, June 29th, 2023. And our session now is an intermediate level panel collaboration between cyber infrastructure facilitators and research data librarians. And I'm going to turn the show over to our moderator, Brandon Biggs. Go ahead, Brandon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Henry. Good afternoon or good morning, good evening, depending on where you're at, everyone. Welcome to our panel on collaboration between CI facilitators and research data librarians. My name is Brandon Biggs. I will be your moderator for today's discussion. So, as we all know, research data management and curation is a complex and ever-evolving field. In recent years, there have been a lot of recognition about the importance of collaboration between different professionals in the research data ecosystem, and to ensure that data is managed and curated effectively. Two such professions who play a critical role in this are the CI facilitators and research data librarians. Today, we're lucky to have a panel of 6 experts from both fields who will share their experiences and insights on collaboration between CI facilitators and research data librarians. Our panelists will discuss the benefits of collaboration, challenges, and how we can better foster collaboration between these two groups of professionals. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists and get started with the discussion. Our first panelist is Emily Cuquier. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Emily, from Washington State University. Emily is a science librarian at Washington State University. Her interests include biology and life sciences, chemistry, human health, pharmacotherapy, data librarianship, and research ethics. Our second panelist is Dr. Ann James, who is a data service librarian from the George Washington University's Libraries and Academic Innovation Organization. In this position, she works on a diverse team of librarians and information professionals who support researchers at all levels looking to find, use, analyze, visualize, publish, share, and preserve data of all types, including quantitative, qualitative, and geospatial. Anne is especially excited to help researchers and instructors make and use maps, engage GIS and qualitative data analysis software, and manage and share their data resources. Our third panelist is sorry, I spelled out your name here. Marcelina Nogales from Florida State University Research Computing Center. Marcelina is a scientific applications manager. She focuses on facilitating research from the FSU students and faculty digital humanities for HPC, including 3D modeling of artifacts and art objects. She also co-founded the Interdisciplinary Data Humanities Initiative, the IDHI, to encourage more humanities research in HPC through teaching, consulting, and installation of specialized software. She also teaches workshops for programming and manages the software team to coordinate all efforts above. Our fifth panelist, I believe our fourth panelist actually, David Reddy is a research facilitator at the University of South Carolina. In addition to providing research computing facilitations for faculty and students, David's area of focus includes running training workshops, communications and publicity, attending faculty and student outreach events, leading the hiring of research computing students and interns, serving as the research computing queue manager for our ticketing system, and leading our metrics dashboard development, administering research computing Tableau server partition, helping to write grants and strategic funding requests, and serving as the primary liaison to USC's Universities Libraries Digital Research Team and the Digital Humanities Working Group. Our fifth panelist is Dr. Jason Sims, who is a research computing manager from Swarthmore College. Jason's focus is on research facilitation and management of the research computing ecosystem at Swarthmore, which is a small liberal arts college. Jason faces similar challenges surrounding computation and data management to those of larger institutions, though without the same resources, both financial and temporal, that many of those larger institutions may have. And our sixth panelist is Nora Zimmerman, who is a digital repository librarian from Lafayette College, which is in Easton, Pennsylvania. Nora's areas of focus are managing the institutional repository for faculty, administrative, and library digital collections content. She collaborates with software developers, campus ITS, and library colleagues to coordinate repository services, as well as provides group and individual education on data manipulation, transformation management, scholarly communication, and digital preservation. Okay, so now that I've introduced the panelists, I'd like to ask each of them to, maybe talk about their career trajectory. We've got 6 expert panelists here. We might be more interested in learning how long you've been in your roles, how did you arrive in this roles, and why did you decide to pursue your roles? Does anybody like to go first? You want to go first, David? I see you're first in my line there, so.
Okay, great. That's a really interesting question. I guess I got started in this field as an undergraduate, having a part-time job in a biomedical computing facility at my undergraduate and graduate institution. And I continued working there while I worked on my graduate work. And then I went into consulting, and then I helped found a small business here, which had some notable success. And then I moved to Columbia, South Carolina, following my wife, who has really had a great career there in the medical school and the local healthcare system. And after getting a job at the University of South Carolina and working there for a while, I discovered that we had a research computing unit, and that they were interested in a lot of the things I had done. I had worked particularly in medical imaging. Oh, I completely left out. Yeah, I had worked in scientific visualization at the American Museum of Natural History for several years. I think that and my current job as a research facilitator in research computing are, really some of the best and most satisfying jobs that I've had during my, long and somewhat checkered career. It seemed like a great opportunity to take my interest in writing and helping people, in doing outreach, engaging in publicity, all these things together kind of combined to make it my ideal job. And one of the things that has really enriched it is having colleagues at our university libraries and their digital team, and working together on a number of initiatives with them. So yeah, I feel like my current position just kind of ties together all the things that I've been doing throughout my now quite long career. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this this position, and that's how I got here.
Awesome. Thanks for your insight and background there, David. Marcelina, would you like to talk about your career trajectory as well?
Definitely. So I'm, I guess, very early on in my career trajectory. I have a background in digital humanities and computational science at Florida State, and then have stayed on to kind of help out with the Research Computing Center with our software team to help with the software installation and just in general research facilitation for I guess STEM fields typically, and then we're trying to branch out to more non-traditional disciplines to include humanities in the course of like teaching with workshops and other sorts of outreach. When I was reading David's background, I was like, oh, there's a lot of things that I'm doing as well. So it's exciting to see that the positions kind of translate well.
Yeah, I agree. That is great. Anne, would you trajectory?
Sure, thanks. So I've been involved in the data space since the early 2000s. I have a bachelor's of business administration in MIS, and then I went into the liberal arts and geography, and then I got a PhD in geography. So all the while working with various forms of data. So after my PhD, I actually pursued a professional staff research positions. I was at the University of Maryland in Baltimore and at a nonprofit research on a research team of a nonprofit institution. And that portfolio of work combined with work that I did during my graduate degree all coalesces around topics related to human rights. So I pursued different research projects looking at access to affordable health care for veterans at one point. I did research on food security and food assistance in the United States. And then after my PhD, I went into doing work on public assistance and workforce development, and then into affordable housing. When I was in affordable housing there at the nonprofit, I found some gaps. So there were a lot of smart folks that I was working with in various internal and external engagements. We did a lot of consulting and capacity building activities or technical assistance activities with folks out in the community. So these were executive directors of nonprofits, folks involved with local and regional government, especially urban planning, and the foundation space. And there were a lot of folks there that had a strong interest in working with and using data and employing maps and helping to make decisions about planning and about their communities and where various forms of investment should be to help improve the lives of people living there. But there were also a lot of challenges that they were experiencing. Some of them for the very first time. We were bringing in data-related works and maps into engagements and presentations, and folks were just like enamored with these things. A lot of them said that they hadn't ever seen their communities mapped this way. And so that to me pointed at a direction of there being a need to do additional work in the area of data literacy. And so I looked for positions in higher education again to route myself back in there to see if there could be some interventions made in the sort of like within the space before people graduated and got into those types of roles. And so since I've been at GW, I came in and was onboarded in September of 2019. And have engaged in various activities and collaborations, increasingly more with folks in the CI space. But of course, you know, the pandemic sort of disrupted a lot of things. So I've worked principally with folks in our research administrators group, our Office of the Vice Provost or Vice President of Research, folks within the library, and then we have various other forms of departments, as well as, of course, folks in our IT department. Right now, our CI Facilitators team is housed within our IT department.
Awesome. Thank you for the insight. Emily, would you like to also provide some information on your trajectory?
Sure, thank you very much. And it's been a very long and twisted career path. So as an undergraduate, I was a chemistry major and particularly focused on theoretical studies of protein folding. So there was already a little bit of high performance computation going on there. I went completely off of that into the pharmaceutical industry and then worked as a consultant and later as a reporter for a weekly magazine. And after that, went back and became a science librarian. As I was developing that career, I got quite an interest in developing research data management skills and the hope to sort of build some of that capacity at my institution. I'm a very hands-on person, so I deliberately started a research project that would give me some hands-on skills in research data management by generating a lot of research data. But it turned out that the particular files I were looking at were so large that really the only workable way to do it was to get an account on our local HPC cluster. So I've kind of gone full circle back to my undergraduate in terms of, now I'm back in high performance computing, except now I'm, studying the scientific record as more of a text corpus than the actual molecules themselves. So I'm relatively early on in the career, but I'm kind of both a librarian and a user in this context.
Well, that's awesome. It is interesting how everybody's careers, kind of tend to go back and forth a little bit and how we end up where we are. So that's great. Thank you. Jason, would you like to provide some background?
I mean, sure, happy to do so. I'll try to keep it very brief and focused. My undergraduate work was in classics, Latin and Greek, actually, so kind of as far from this as you can possibly be. But then I went on to do master's and ultimately doctoral work in cultural anthropology. But all the while I was doing that, I was, working either in ITS or ITS adjacent kind of, positions to sort of pay the bills, if you will. And once I completed my doctorate work, I just sort of stayed there and started doing instructional technology work that was focused mostly in the social sciences and humanities, kind of as befitting my background. And that's what I did a lot of until it became clear that one of the institutions I was at, Lafayette College, which is where Nora is, so she can fill in some of these gaps as well. We kind of decided that, even though we were branding ourselves as a STEM focused, liberal arts college, we needed to have a much more robust kind of technological ecosystem in order to support that claim. And so I sort of volunteered myself to craft at least the high performance computing elements of that ecosystem. And through that work, which took a number of years, we finally did launch the HPC environment. And it became immediately clear that I needed to work very closely with experts in data management, and that typically being the librarians. And so I worked with Nora on some projects that we can maybe get into a little bit later. But that sort of led to my current career arc, sort of developing into managing that kind of ecosystem and working very closely with data and working closely with the researchers to ensure that their data management from soup to nuts and all the technology that's involved in that workflow kind of works well together. And so here I am.
Awesome. And speaking of Nora, of course, Nora, would you also like to talk about your background some?
Sure thing. So my undergraduate degree is in art history, so I might even have one up on you, Jason, as far as I don't know, humanities degrees that ended up working in this space. But yeah, so I started working in libraries during my time as an undergraduate in an art library. And then while I was pursuing my master's in library and information science, I was continuing to work in that space, but more for private artists' estates, doing database management for them, kind of more registrar type work, working with their registrars for managing intellectual control of their collections and their corpus of work. But after I received my MLIS, I went to work for a large vendor that does digitization work, very large scale digitization work, as his data storage manager. And that was really, we had a very high throughput and had clients that varied from large public library systems to government agencies like NARA, DoD, to public radio stations digitizing their entire back catalog. So it was many, many different forms of data, including obsolete computer media. And so being his data storage manager at that vendor, I think helped me to gain a lot of facility, different data formats, different metadata formats, and how, different clients, different purposes would have, a range of uses for that, in the future. So back in spring of 2018, I started at Lafayette College as their digital repository librarian. And so I primarily am focused on being a software kind of product owner for their institutional repository. But because Lafayette is a small liberal arts college that has a really strong engineering focus, but I would say it's primarily a teaching focused institution, although a lot of research does go on there. And so that is really at the core of what we're trying to do there. So I could go on, but I think I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, Nora. So as all of our panelists kind of mentioned, you've all got various backgrounds. Maybe you didn't end up where you might have expected years ago, but I mean, kind of talking about that, what kind of experiences or training or educations do you bring to your collaborations, or what do you find the most helpful in supporting the collaboration processes? Would anybody like to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I can just jump in maybe and say that my educational background is absolutely critical in my ability to facilitate research, and that's mostly because I at least like to pretend that I can cover most of the bases. So I have my undergraduate, which was mostly humanities focused. I have my master's and PhD, which at least from the anthro side of things is very social science focused. And balancing that qualitative and quantitative work. But then I also have a Master of Public Health, which was very quantitatively focused. It was very much bench science. It was, working with gas chromatography and doing all of this other kind of stuff. And so as a result of that, I'm able to talk with researchers regardless of kind of where they come from and what their goals are. And I can understand the discipline specific language, and I have experience in those worlds. And so that's been very critical to me. And just, I'm very thankful for the background that I have and that I'm able to bring to the table. Do I think that that's a requirement of doing this kind of work? No, but I certainly think that it has smoothed over a lot of the conversations, and understanding the academic cycles and the grant cycles, and sort of how the various disciplines work, not only in terms of their research goals, but in their data management expectations and whatnot. So yeah, for me, I would say that my kind of very holistic educational background has given me a nice advantage in that, and has been very helpful in the work.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, especially the expectation aspect of it too. It's like a very big, like when you're doing either intake interviews, or if you're like having like the initial consultation, like establishing the expectations on both sides of things is super helpful. And I think that when you have users that are interested in doing research on something and they have like the big question that they're trying to answer, like filling in those gaps from either like the computational science side of my background of like, okay, this is how we can achieve the research question that you're asking. And then additionally, like how much big can you make the research question outside of the initial request?
Yeah, I have to say that my background really does help me in this a lot. I want to, I've felt a lot of resonance with what Jason and Ann said about having a liberal arts background. I went to a liberal arts college. I studied an awful lot of music while I was there. And in order to graduate, I had to invent a major called music technology. And then working as a consultant, professional consultant, I had to get very good at listening to people, finding out what their needs were, and crafting an economical solution that left everyone happy. Got very good at delivering things like that in, like reasonably short project kind of steps. And I think having that liberal arts background, I really learned how to, not only write well, but write convincingly and also write politely. A lot of people are kind of terse in their emails when they reply to people, and I try not to take that approach. I really want to be like, well, this is what we can do to help you, and we should have a meeting and all that kind of stuff. Really trying to take the sum of my life experiences and make things easier for other people, I guess is my real goal. So I understand the technology. I've been working in the sciences, particularly medicine, but also things like physical anthropology. When you have one of these broad backgrounds, almost no matter who you meet, you have something that you can relate to them with and understand where they're coming from and what their needs are.
Yeah, I would say the formal training is certainly helpful. Having some of the language, having some of the ability to relate to folks, and then also because I was trained in both numeric and geographic analyses as well as qualitative analyses. So sort of taking a methodological approach throughout most of my graduate education. Having the ability to ask really good, have good interviews with folks. A lot of times within our university, folks with research questions and needs will often come to the library first or as an initial step. And so in the past, having the ability to chat with someone, figure out the scale of their work, how much computing kinds of resources that they're going to be needing or that they're looking to access, that can be helpful in making sure that they get referred to the correct department or the resources that we have. So for context, we have, of course, most folks have laptops or desktop machines. Within our computer labs, we have some graphics intensive computing facilities available for folks who are working with more moderate sized data sets. And then of course we have the supercomputing resources. So oftentimes, if I'm working with, say, a graduate student who's got an older laptop, it's maybe an easier referral to make in terms of getting them to that size of machine rather than having them go back and forth to different departments.
One thing I'd add for myself is just from the background of journalism, I have really learned to think very much about what a person is an expert in and what they can really speak on with authority, and what might be very close to that background, but still, is not really within their particular strength. And I see in academia now all the time that there are so many different people here who may have an extremely high depth of knowledge and competency in one very advanced area, but really not in another. And so when you talk to people like this, they can sound extremely intelligent and converse with you at an extremely high level in certain areas, but they still might have really only a baseline level of knowledge about sort of the practical computation or how an HPC works. And it can be kind of easy to forget sort of exactly what knowledge level you should expect another person to have, even when they're very intelligent and experienced in one area. So one thing I just like to think about is, don't make assumptions about what the other person might know, even things that might seem like they're really simple or some of the earliest steps that you learn about in your field, because, they're still smart. They just haven't been exposed to those things. And also kind of learning to have those conversations diplomatically. So you're not really, really dumbing things down, but you're also making sure that you don't gloss over those things that maybe it really would help to step back and explain and make sure that they understand are even an option.
Oh, sorry, Nora, go ahead.
I guess I would just pipe up to say that having a intimate knowledge of the repository landscape definitely helps me to have consultations where I can make an appropriate recommendation for data sharing at the conclusion of a project. And earlier in the outset, with the sort of methodological documentation that sometimes maybe gets forgotten about in the heat of the research, which is kind of, I think, what our researchers are more focused on, is like asking great questions and exploring their different tools and doing reviews of similar research and literature. And so in the heat of that, they may be less interested in documenting their processes in ways that would make the data they produce more useful at the conclusion of their project. So I feel like that's a way that my sort of situation in the repository space helps me to maybe guide them.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So kind of going along with this this theme that Nora and Emily, you both brought up of working with the people who may be experts in one area but maybe not so much in another. Kind of thinking about more specifically about the potential for collaborations with maybe your counterpart. If you're more of a research computing facilitator or a research data librarian, what are some points of challenge or opportunity for collaboration between these individuals?
So I guess for our case, our research data librarians, the ones that we've collaborated with the most are in like our humanities libraries. So in that case, getting connected, I guess in the same way, I believe that Anne said, to get people connected and like refer them to the right people. So when their data sets are larger, or they could use like the computational level of the Research Computing Center or HPC, and have that consultation with our group to kind of see whether or not they can use it, or we can provide them like specific software as opposed to having them download it on their own systems. That's one way that we collaborate. And then another way that we do is the Office of Digital Research and Scholarship, also located in our humanities library, is mostly on the publishing side of academia research. So we can kind of let them do the public facing stuff and like the final output of humanities research that would start on at the Research Computing Center.
Awesome. Okay. Anybody else like to talk about that, or move on to the next topic? Okay. Go ahead.
I guess I'd like to mention that, and I heard this in another talk earlier this week, that the thing about the libraries is that everybody on campus knows where the libraries are. And so it's one of the first places that they come when they're trying to find information and resources. And for us, it's been incredibly valuable because the digital team at the libraries is already doing work with repositories and data management planning. And, you know, being at a smaller state school in an EPSCoR state, we are somewhat resource limited. We don't have a huge research computing team at all. So having people who are already experts in, you know, finding a repository, doing a data management plan, all that stuff has been a fantastic resource for us. You know, it's hard to places like, you know, small state schools, there's not time or resources to fight over territory. Everybody needs to be you know, reaching out and pulling together to accomplish our goals. So it's just been incredibly helpful for us to have the libraries team both be available and so willing to work with us. And, you know, on the other side, there many of them are faculty members with their own research, and they're coming to us with, you know, gigabytes or terabytes of text that need to be analyzed, and you know, asking about doing it on the HPC. So it's just been a great collaboration, I think, for us, and you know, just super valuable all around. And plus, we are also running our workshop series now in collaboration with them. So they and our graduate school run a certificate program for undergraduates and graduates. And so 5 of our general programming courses, one of which I teach, have been presented as part of that certificate program now for the last couple of years. So there's a lot of just sharing of resources, sharing of knowledge, sharing of expertise. You know, I'm really glad I have 40 years of Linux command line experience. So because otherwise I think the librarians are actually much better prepared than I am. And I'm just glad that I have my jobs, you know. So oh, that's all I'm going to say about that for now, though. Thanks.
Anne, it looked like you were unmuted. Did you have something you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, I would just second a lot of those comments. So we have myself and several of my librarian colleagues are trained carpentries instructors. And then we also have at least one person on our CI team, the director of that team, who's a certified carpentries instructor. So that's, you know, one possible point or opportunity for collaboration. And then in the recent term, so since really since the fall, a lot of us in the library, and we have multiple libraries, so we coordinate with colleagues in the health sciences library as well on the new NIH policy rollout with respect to data sharing and preservation. And as a part of that collaboration, we've also worked closely with our OVPR folks and our research administrator folks and our director of the CI team to talk through things like outreach strategies, workflows, the systems that we have that are being engaged for things like data use agreements and data management plans, and sort of talking through that process as we approached the January 2023 debut and now sort of beyond. So that's been a more recent collaborative effort.
I can say that I've worked also at a couple of places where the libraries and ITS used to be a merged organization. And in both of those cases, the breakup or the divorce, however you want to characterize it, was less than amicable. I guess that's one way to put it. And so, you know, and currently at Swarthmore, it's a much better situation, that relationship. But what I have always wanted to do, and it hasn't always worked out the way that I would like, is, I think some people here mentioned that one of the things that happens is that users, researchers, faculty, even students to a certain extent, they will reach out to whoever they're either comfortable with or who happens to be nearby with these questions. And that could be a librarian, it could be an ITS person, it could be a professor, it could be any number of people. And one of the things that I've seen, unfortunately, at a lot of institutions at which I've worked is that the answers that they would get may differ based on who they're asking the same question to. And to me, that's a little bit problematic. And I always have this utopian vision, which, as far as I can tell, will never come to fruition, where, we collaborate in such ways and there are shared resources available such that no matter who the entry point is for those kinds of questions, there's going to be a similar level of, response, that there's going to be a shared kind of understanding of the services that are available, of the workflows, of how the institution, not just how the library, not just how ITS, not just how a unit or a department can support data, research, collaborations, all that kind of stuff. And I know that that's very Pollyanna-ish to wish, but part of my work is always trying to push that goal a little bit farther down the road. And it doesn't always work out that well, but without getting into too many specifics, I'll just say that that is a struggle, no matter almost where I've worked. And I would love to see that, and I love to see any sort of initiatives towards smoothing that over a bit.
I would add from the librarian perspective, as someone who's gotten into librarianship and research data management very recently, at least for now, the types of education programs that are out there really don't talk a whole lot about high performance computing in particular as an avenue that you would even look at. And a lot of the education for this group of librarians is very much piecemeal and very much kind of on the fly. Like, you may be hired to create that capability at your institution as opposed to being brought into a place that already has something going and you get a new assignment. So people are learning a lot and they're trying to learn a lot about many different topics and many different stakeholders all at once. And that's just one that does not get thought of very much. So the extent to which you can, each time a new librarian gets hired, just like send an email, say, hey, we're here. If you have any questions about data management or data storage, that would be amazingly helpful, because, they definitely taught me the 3-2-1 rule of, how you make data backups, but never did they say, check with your, institution's computing cluster. They always said like, oh, look for your institution's cloud storage, however they do that. So like even knowing that that's a thing is a really huge thing. And then also secondly, with that, given that there is a fair amount of overlap in kind of the tasks between HPC resources and the kinds of tasks in data management that librarians have to advise about, it can sometimes be really unclear sort of when different people should be the person to do the troubleshooting or make decisions about things, or how those two things can talk to each other. So again, for example, in RDM education, they teach a lot about like file architecture, like how you organize a project, how you name your files to be very consistent and very findable and all of these things. But what they don't take into account is how do you name your files if you want to think about running them by batch into a script? Like, that's not part of the education there, at least in the places that I've been. And so, those kinds of things where there's really a lot of integration, I think is space for a lot of conversations that really haven't had a lot of opportunity to have, especially if, again, you're at an institution where either the research computing or the research data management program or both are pretty new, or just getting off the ground, understaffed. Like, it's really hard to know those things without having a good chance to talk to people.
You got a couple of thumbs up in the chat, so some people definitely agree with you there. So that's great. So, while we're talking about collaboration, it sounds like there's a lot going on kind of, within your organization. Do you have any like recommendations for people on maybe how to foster that collaboration better at their organizations, or if they wanted to kind of get started? Do you have recommendations on more of that, how they could start if they're kind of starting from the ground up, or they've been asked recently even to start something like this? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I've found it's been very helpful to bring the Office of Sponsored Programs, or whatever the equivalent is, Office of Sponsored Research, into that conversation in concert with the librarians and with ITS staff, to understand the panoply of resources that are available, because often that is a place where researchers go, particularly at small liberal arts schools where there may be less of an emphasis on research. That office may be the first place that gets a whiff that somebody wants to do something or apply for funding or whatever. And if they know the various stakeholders, they can help connect those groups in kind of a unified way. I know that Nora and I worked collaboratively at Lafayette with the Office of Sponsored Programs to offer services to consult on data management plans in concert with one another. We actually had a shared email address that went to both of us that allowed us to collaborate on those discussions with researchers and stuff like that. But I just find any sort of coordination like that that can happen with a shared understanding of the resources available can help to progress that goal.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's great insight. Does anybody else want to talk about that as well? Okay, awesome. So, kind of we've talked about, inner organization. Right now we're kind of, mixing and talking about working and talking together with people outside of our organization. Has anybody had experiences working or having multi-institution collaborations? Maybe anybody want to talk about how that went, or projects that you may have worked on that were more than your organization? Okay, no, that's fine. I just figured I'd ask. Oh, go ahead, Jason.
I certainly hope that others can contribute to these conversations as well. I'll just say that it's something that we're trying to do more of. So, just locally, like very hyper locally with us, Swarthmore is part of Trico along with Bryn Mawr and Haverford. And so in my role, which is incidentally a new role for Swarthmore, it was just, I'm the first person to have that role. And so we are trying to reach extramurally quite a bit, and collaborate on resources to have joint discussions amongst the ITS groups, amongst the librarians as well. And given my connections and geographic proximity to Lafayette, I'm still very much working with faculty members up there and staff. And I think that actually is going to need to be more of a thing as the types of questions that researchers engage with, as the data sizes grow, as it becomes maybe not as economically feasible for every place to have carbon copies of what everyone else has. Like, why can't we just do some consolidation in certain areas? I think from a cost savings perspective, that's going to have to become more necessary. But we are trying to do a lot of collaborative efforts where it makes sense to do so. We're also seeing, Pennsylvania is kind of interesting in that we don't have necessarily like a statewide science DMZ, and we're in the process of trying to construct that, which would encourage and facilitate collaborations and data sharing and other things like that, collaborative science throughout the state. So there are a lot of initiatives like that happening, and I'm sure that similar things are happening elsewhere.
Go ahead, Anne.
I was going to mention that I was one of the co-authors of a paper that was successfully submitted and is going to be presented at the PERC conference that's coming up in Portland, Oregon. I think it's at the end of July. So that was in collaboration with some colleagues that were out of the CARCC group, which is the, help me out, Campus Advanced Research Computing Consortium, I think. Is that correct? Which I believe was provided as a resource for folks to engage with in the last couple of days. So that was a really positive experience working with folks in that space. We did it in a 100% virtual environment because folks were spread across the country, and there was some great leadership on there, lots of expertise from a diversity of folks at different levels and coming from different backgrounds. So I'd very much sort of encourage folks to participate in that group, and especially if you're relatively new to the field. I found it a very inclusive collaboration, despite me, I think, being the only person from a library there on that particular paper writing experience. I will say our university here just received I think it was a $20 million NSF grant recently around the development of an AI institute that's going to be in collaboration with partners from HBCUs. So I would expect as that initiative gets up and running that we'll be doing additional or having opportunities for additional collaborations with folks in the HBCU space. If not, folks who are doing facilitation and data librarianship, but researchers who are a part of that initiative. But I hope that it gets to include us as well.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Anne. I've talked to some of the, I believe it's the CARC organization, right, is the short of it. I've talked to them some, and yeah, it's been a great organization. So I definitely agree with that. So kind of talking about, I guess, shifting gears just a little bit. There have been, a lot of ongoing efforts to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. Have any of you had an opportunity to engage in collaboration with your counterpart to advance any diversity, equity, and inclusion related goals or initiatives?
Yeah, so we actually put together, in conjunction with our colleagues in the library, a grant proposal which wasn't funded to do STEM outreach around AI and machine learning, and to include the HBCUs, of which there are 7 in South Carolina, which is a lot for such a small state. And unfortunately, that wasn't funded. I'm very glad to hear that a similar proposal was funded through Anne. And I also want to say, and as regards that, though, in trying to put that together, I think the statewide science librarians were just such a huge resource, because librarians are much more used to working together. And unless you're working at a national resource, most research computing groups tend to be a little insular and isolated. So it was the science librarians who were really instrumental in putting together the outreach component in that grant proposal. I also want to second what Anne said about CARC, and I believe that's the same paper that I'm a co-author on. And it really was a great experience. It actually wasn't all that much work, and it was a lot of fun, and we got a publication out of it. And I really hats off to Tim Middlecoop and Claire Mizumoto and the other driving forces over there at CARC for putting that effort together. And it really was a pleasure to participate in.
Something that we did a couple of years ago that didn't directly involve the HPC group, but was a collaboration between the Data Science and Digital Scholarship Group, Digital Humanities Community Practice, and the Center for Inclusive STEM at Lafayette, was a semester-long read-along and discussion series that culminated in a author lecture for the book Data Feminism. This was sponsored by NSF, and it was really kind of focused on issues of data literacy and data science practice and methods. And so we got really an interdisciplinary group in those discussions of students and faculty and just folks that were interested in data science broadly. And we found that it really stimulated interest in the data science minor among students. And I think it would be awesome to do something like that again that really involves the HPC unit more, kind of in maybe planning and book selection, because it would, kind of be a way to connect people smoothly with those resources, like at the end of that discussion circuit. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Nora. Okay, so I think we've got just a little over 15 minutes. So kind of with one of my last questions, I wanted to ask our panelists, what recommendations do you have for our audience members who are interested in initiating or strengthening their collaborations between individuals performing research computing facilitation or research data librarians? Like what would you recommend to make collaboration more successful and effectively support the research process? I can provide a little bit of background from my own perspective while everyone's thinking. Coming from more of the HPC computation side, I work with research data librarians, and I'm always kind of looking for their advice, because like many have said, people going to go to them first because they know where to access resources. They've got that background, right? So I'd be interested in some other insight, if anybody has some, of what other recommendations on how we could do that better.
So I would say, in terms of helping improve collaborations from within the library, one of the things that I've sort of taken up since I've arrived at GW is helping to facilitate training within the library for staff and librarians in terms of subscription services that we have access to different tools and software. And a part of that would be, or has been, providing resources for learning, opportunities for learning more about what's happening within the CI space and supercomputing, and some of those more technical aspects of the tools. So providing folks opportunities for engaging with working with scripting languages. So certainly it's not the level of expertise that some of the folks in our CI team have, but most of the folks, so for context, most of that particular team has been only formally there for maybe 6 months. So it's a relatively new team. Prior to that, we had folks with more like systems administrator roles that wore multiple hats.
I think that it's helpful to like Anne said, like the trainings in the libraries, I think to extend that, like if we're having users that aren't super familiar with it, having workshops that are based in not only learning like programming languages, but also learning how to use like Linux and HPC stuff, and for varying levels of expertise. So if you come in with like having already an introduction class to programming, then having maybe an intermediate level of those programming skills, but having those in the libraries with that audience of like the students and the researchers that are using those libraries already, and just being like, hey, we have this extra thing for you. We also at Florida State have done the Photogrammetry Institute, which is for 3D modeling, which is not your typical use case for HPC, but you can creating 3D models on the HPC allows for people to come in without necessarily having that like all of the system software stuff ready on their personal computers or on the library computers. So having that accessible through Open On Demand, which is again another like graphical interface that is easier to use for people that are less familiar with the scripting and the Linux side of things, is another way of exposing them to high performance computing, and like I guess like reiterating that like this is a collaborative effort between the libraries and HPC, just in general.
To reiterate a little, just feel free to volunteer things that you can do or you can help with, because libraries just aren't necessarily going to know. And when you do that, try to explain it a little bit more in terms, not so much of what it is. You know, we have this kind of capacity, we have this kind of RAM or this kind of software, you know, kind of explain like the use case or what having that thing accomplishes. Like this will let you work with files that are larger than this. This will let you work with certain types of imaging data. This will let you accomplish X tasks. Because if you couch it that way, then it's less reliant on whether or not the librarian happens to know exactly what that thing is or not. And it's more very oriented on, you know, what could we actually do with this?
That framing is a really, sorry, Jason, to interrupt you. That framing is a really important aspect, I think, as well, right? Because I know that working with HPC folks, I often get kind of wrapped up in the HPC, you know, tech jargon maybe that isn't useful necessarily. So go ahead, Jason.
I mean, to me, collaboration. So if we're talking about ways to encourage collaboration, collaboration entails obviously working together. And to that end, I would encourage folks who are heading down the path of, let's say, creating data management plans, not to think of them in terms of, this is ITS's data management plan, or this is the library's data management plan. I mean, this goes back to what David was saying earlier about competing over territory, more or less. That's got to go away. You know, I would say it's more effective to think about it in terms of, you know, what is our institutional data management plan, and what resources can we bring to bear on that collaboratively and together, so that everyone's working towards the same goals, that we don't have people at cross purposes, we don't have people, you know, trying to solve it all under one roof. That there is recognition that this is valuable for the institution as a whole and holistically, and for all of our researchers and all of our students, and that does entail from the ground up a foundation of collaboration, and not everyone to reinvent their own wheel. I've just seen it over and over, and it's very sad and frustrating when that happens. So I would just give that piece of advice to try to think about things at a more abstracted level. You know, it's almost like ensuring that your institution has its own kind of mission and vision statement, so that everyone has something to point to and say, whatever we do is in service of that. It's kind of a similar thing, because then there's not kind of trying to race to be like, oh, well, the library worked with, you know, 28 researchers, and well, ITS only worked with 15 or what. I mean, you know, we're all working towards the same mission, right? Like we all want to facilitate good research. We all want to teach students. We want them to have a positive experience. We want to make an impact on science or on the world or whatever it is that you want to characterize it as. And to me, that requires working together from the start. And language matters in that, talking about it in certain ways that do group everyone together under an umbrella rather than leaving it siloed.
I think that was really well put, Jason. And I'm glad to see there was a little resonance there. And actually, I'm kind of inspired a bit by what Marcelina has suggested, that libraries can be teaching programming and scripting languages. And maybe for our next year, that should be our goal, would be to actually teach those courses that we have in Python and R and MATLAB and maybe even Unix shell, and actually have an in-person class hosted in the library and publicized by the library and try to do outreach. And I guess the other big thing there are two other big things actually we've done with our library. One, we have a proposal to put together a visualization center, and this is something a lot of R1 institutions have. A lot of top tier universities, each school will have its own visualization center. And the logical place to put that, we found, was actually in the main library, on the main floor. And the library had a proposal for renovating some of that floor into a multi-purpose space. And it just became the natural place that both the library digital team and research computing thought would be the best location on campus for it. Now, unfortunately, that proposal hasn't been funded yet, but we're going to keep trying on that one. We're very much inspired by, say, North Carolina State University, where they have two separate visualization centers, both located in libraries on different parts of campus. And the other big thing that I've become involved with is the Digital Humanities Working Group that Brandon spoke about in his introduction. And coming from a background where I have worked in anthropology and in the humanities in the past, as well as in the hard sciences, that seemed like a great fit for me. And by attending it, I've managed to really a pretty fair amount of outreach to, I guess what RCD professionals call the, non-traditional disciplines, where you find that you've got an English professor who's got a terabyte of text-based data that he needs to analyze, or somebody who has multiple terabytes of digitized artwork that they need to process, and also 3D photogrammetry, right? So finding people who are in cultural anthropology who are doing that stuff. It's been really a great outreach, and the working group is really spearheaded by the staff in the libraries. So altogether, we've just had a fantastic series of collaborations, and I very much look forward to having that continue and grow. Really, I think the focus, it's sort of like librarians are used to finding data, organizing data, finding a place to put it, and the research computing people are very focused on ingesting data, processing data, and then trying to push it away as quickly as possible, so that we have space for the incoming data we need to process. The two groups are just so synergistic, right? You know, we have these different focuses, but we all have the same goal, which is, yeah, to enable the student experience, to enable learning, to enable research. So, you know, I very much second what Jason and then Marcelina and the other panelists are saying in that regard.
Great, thanks all. We did have a quick question in the chat, David. I think this was for you about your visualization center. I think that a couple of panelists have talked about visualization being an important aspect of their work. I was kind of curious if you could talk a little more about the visualization center just in our last couple of minutes here.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'd be glad to talk about that. Well, basically, we wanted to have a place with large displays that could be repurposed for multiple uses. I mean, for instance, if you think about virtual sets that are being used in film, in performance, in dance, even in music, you can have you know, virtual backdrops using large displays for communicating GIS data, scientific data, doing collaboration. It could be a multimedia performance space. And you know, I think we should recognize that at state universities, things like athletics are really important. It could be used as a backdrop for signing ceremonies, even for athletes. Instead of having to cut away to the big play, you have the signing and the big play is just behind you. We got a lot of buy-in from, for instance, our Big Health Data Sciences Center. You know, that it would be a perfect place for them to do collaborative work. In addition, it would be a place where you could, you know, sign out virtual reality and augmented reality systems. We could have collaboration tables, sand tables, that kind of thing. And also have it be like a focal center for doing 3D modeling and 3D design and testing out things like virtual sets for say site screens on larger theaters around campus and the region. It's been a dream of mine for a long time to have a facility like that, and it could be really a great asset to the institution. But you know, I understand that getting funding together for something like that is not trivial, and you know, may take some years. So we continue to work on the proposal and to refine it. And actually, I think my big task for this year, which I hope to get to, is to do a 3D model of what such a center might be, so we can actually, you know, have people see, not just imagine what that might entail and what its advantages could be. I hope I answered the question. Jeff, did you have anything else you wanted to know about it? Yeah, I suggest looking at, like, NCSU has one. I believe the University of Florida has a visualization center. So yeah, someplace where people can go and they can actually sit down at a rendering system with 4 GPUs in it, and you know, be driving 3 large displays and their display, and do this kind of, you know, professional modeling work that gets used so much now in films and commercials, and you know, really the green screen has gone away and everything's is done in front of large displays nowadays.
I'll echo what Jeff said. That does sound pretty awesome. So thanks, David, and thanks for the question, Jeff. So I as far as I know, that is the end of our session time. I believe that it was 75 minutes. So I want to say thanks again to our panelists. I believe that their contact information is probably on the registration website, or maybe you could reach out to Henry and see if anybody else wants to set up some collaboration or reach out to our panelists. But thank you all again, and really appreciate your time and your willingness to be here. So thanks.
Yes, thank you all very much. We really appreciate this terrific session. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.